Hi, this is Uncle Matt's D&D Studio. I'm Matt Finch, and today we're having a conversation with Tim Brannan of the Other Side blog. If you are interested in Dungeons and Dragons discussions and content, please make sure that you subscribe to the channel. And with no further ado, let's move on to the conversation with Tim. Okay, so I'm here with Tim Brannan. Tim,
Hi.
let's get started, and I guess begin by telling me a little bit about yourself, and then we'll delve into the things that you do.
Great. So my name's Tim Brannan, and I have been semi-professionally, I guess I could even say, writing game materials forever, it seems. Although I didn't start getting paid to do it until about 2000, 99, 2000, when I started doing some work with Eden Studios, working on the Witchcraft and Buffy the Vampire Slayer lines, and then moving on to Ghosts of Albion, which is the core rule book that I wrote. But since I started playing in the D&D back in '79, so I've always been writing stuff for that. So I've been kind of going off on my own and writing a lot of what I call basic era material for D&D, and I've been getting into a lot of swords and wizardry in the last, I'm kind of a latecomer, I guess, to this, about the last year and a half, 2 years maybe, and only publishing, stuff for it for the last year.
And now, okay, so we're starting to move into the things that you do, and so
Sure.
I first ran across you via the blogosphere, ran into your blog.
Right.
And for anybody watching, let me just go ahead and say real quick, Tim's last name is spelled with an A at the end, not with. I'm sorry, is spelled with an A at the end, not an O. So
Or an E.
Right, exactly. So, and your blog that I've been following for a while is theotherside.timsbrannan.com for anybody who wants to go and look that up. And I'll try to remember also to put a link in the description of the video down below. So, start off with a little bit about the blog, and then we'll get into the topics.
So, I guess really it was right around 2000 or so. I had been working on a lot of projects and been posting to a lot of message boards. And the thing that I was noticing is the message boards were great. And I loved the interaction that I could get with people there. But sometimes I wanted to talk about Call of Cthulhu. Sometimes I wanted to talk about World of Darkness. Sometimes I wanted to talk about D&D. And actually lots of times I wanted to talk about D&D. And since most of the sites I were on were horror related, they weren't all that interested in it. I'm like, okay, fine, I'll go start my own thing. And I got onto Blogspot, or Blogger at the time, and it was about 2007, and I put up a couple tentative posts, and with the intention of it being a game design blog where I would talk about the projects I was working on. I wasn't really planning on doing much other than that with it, to be honest with you. Just talk about, hey, I'm working on this project. Here's what I think. Here's a couple samples. And of course, over the years, it's kind of grown beyond that. So I guess I've been doing it for 10 years, although 2007 and 2008 were kind of thin years. I started posting probably in earnest all the time in 2009. And then
let's talk about your main topics as it morphed. So we're sort of getting into, it sounds like first old school D&D stuff, and then into swords and wizardry, and so but you do have a few topics that you tend to focus on, or at least cyclically focus on. So talk about what kind of stuff what kinds of things are people going to see if they go and look at your blog?
So a couple of things. I mean, I spend a lot of time on old school D&D. I mean, that's what I grew up on. And I spend, like, typically on Mondays, you'll see a report for whatever I did over the weekend. So I'll talk about, this is the game I played with my kids over the weekend. And I'm currently going through all of the classic D&D and AD&D, so basic D&D and first edition AD&D adventures with my boys. And we're doing it with 5th edition, which has been actually kind of a blast. And we're adopting all sorts of old school elements and ideas for it.
Let me jump in there, because that's a topic that I want to talk about quite a bit. So let me switch the rails over to the question of what is it. There are a lot of old schoolers who are either moving to fifth edition or using fifth edition in particular ways. What are you doing that you consider to be alterations or tweaks or just an approach to playing with fifth edition that you're referring to as being more old school? Tell me some about that.
We're actually doing, well, technically we're doing 3 different campaigns in fifth edition, and each one has a slightly different feel to it. So the first one I'm doing is pretty much out of the box, fifth edition, by the rules, rules as written. And we are taking in little bits and pieces from the Unearthed Arcana series that's Wizards puts out all the time. So WotC's always putting out a bunch of free stuff for people to try. So we incorporate some of that in, and that I'm thinking of more of my pure fifth edition game. The other one we are using, I actually have I'm looking over here at my game stuff. I actually have my fifth edition books here, but stuck in the middle there is my first edition Dungeon Master's Guide. So I will go. Incredible resource. I mean, just
to toss in, anybody in any game system can benefit from grabbing a copy of the first edition Dungeon Master's Guide.
Absolutely. So I use lots of ideas from there. One of the first things I did was, it sort of came up with my youngest son, who's my experimenter in the games. He's the kind of player that makes all DMs sort of scratch their heads and think, why in the world is he doing that? But it's all on the basis of fun. So he ended up with 2 potions, a potion of healing and a potion of quickness. He said, I want to take them both at the same time. I'm like, oh, well, I happen to have a table for that. It's in the DMG. So we pulled that out, and he drank both potions, and it turns out that he rolled whatever it was, 100 on the percentile table for new effects. So he got the benefits of both potions. So I said, oh, well, you've got twice as much healing. And he's like, oh, this is awesome. We should do this more often. I'm like, oh, okay, we will then. Okay. So we decided that, we'll just start doing more of that. So what I've been doing is I've really been jumping on Drive-Thru RPG when they have the modules. So I'll get my old modules here and I'll print them out, and then I'm able to scribble all my old notes in it, so I can write in my 5th edition notes, but also whatever first edition notes I want to add. So I'm constantly going through pretty much all my books from all the different versions of the game, but concentrating mostly on first edition and basic.
And you're mainly doing that with modules?
Yeah, because I spent probably the early part of 2000 writing adventures for the Buffy the Vampire Slayer game, writing adventures for Ghost of Albion, and I was churning out probably 2 or 3 adventures a month. And I like them. I enjoyed them. I thought they were great. I just got kind of burned out writing adventures. And
that's an incredibly fast pace for
writing. when you're working on a licensed product, you got to get it done fast, because the license can always go away, as most people have probably seen with their favorite licensed product. So we were writing a bunch, and not all of them got published. A few of them got out there, and I actually sort of self-published a few of them myself, and I posted like the sort of the run by of what happened in them on my blog. So that's something else that I used to have on there as well.
So let me jump in with another branch here, right? We're talking about old school 5th edition D&D. I want to branch off and just ask the question, how long roughly does it take you to write a module? I think it takes me about 80 hours.
That's a good question. If I am doing I kind of stick with sort of a 3-act system with my adventures. And I can usually come up with a concept in a couple hours, and I'd say it takes me around 50 to 60 hours to write a full 3-act adventure.
We're going to do a whole nother interview at some point about designing adventures when you are writing for publication, because that will be a great topic. But I do want to pursue since I've got my teeth into this whole old school fifth edition,
Right. Yeah.
brought it up. Let's follow with that. So what I'm hearing is that the way you're doing it is a sort of side by side usage of stuff that's written for first edition or other early editions, and then what you're doing is you're placing fifth edition mechanisms in there so that you've got an overall context of the older style module, but you're putting in fifth edition mechanics, and that's the sort of melding that you use.
Yeah, so my first campaign, I am taking the boys through, and this is the one that I'm calling pure fifth edition, although it's pure like, English language is pure. It's pure fifth edition, but I'm taking them through the GDQ series. So they just wrapped up the Giants, and I even grabbed a couple extra bits from the WotC published Giants module that they did a couple years ago.
I was about to ask which Giants you were using. Okay, so you're using the old one.
I used the original G123. I pulled that one up, but I've got a buddy who's borrowing it, and I ended up getting online, finding all of these full color maps that WotC did for third edition. So I printed those up. I got a Stone Giant adventure off of Dragon's Foot that I inserted in as sort of a side adventure for them, and I adopted the Cloud Giant adventure from the recent Storm King's Thunder.
And if we have any fifth edition people who are watching this, and this will probably be of more interest to fifth edition people than many of the videos that I do, Dragon's Foot is a very old message board that's just been around forever. And they do have a lot of free resources for the old school games. And so one of those is a module for Stone Giants, and to insert those into the GDQ series. And there are lots of other resources like that, including a magazine that they published up to a certain point. So if you are a fifth edition player and you want to sort of take Tim's approach to this of taking something older and putting in mechanics, then Dragon's Foot is a very, very useful site for doing that. Until you're familiar with the community there, you may want to sort of avoid posting, on the actual message boards, because it can be a very touchy place. But in terms of resources, that's great even for a first timer. Okay, sorry, Tim, go ahead.
No, that's fine. Actually, it's an interesting dovetail into the conversation we were just having. For the longest time, I grabbed Storm King's Thunder, and I was never really planning on running the 5th edition version of the adventures because I was.
Do you remember who wrote that?
The Storm or the Stone Giant one?
Yeah.
R.C. Pennell.
Okay. All right. Great.
So I believe that's how you pronounce his last name. But anyway, so I had that, and I had the Storm King's Thunder, which, for reasons that make sense in my mind, and who knows why that is, I kept calling it Storm King's Daughter. And the whole intention about me buying all these original.
I know why.
Yeah. So I was
because the Frost Giant's daughter is that.
Well, and that's where I'm going with this.
Okay, go ahead.
So I'm leaving all of the 5th edition adventures for my son to run because he loves. I mean, he cut his teeth on 3rd edition. He grabbed my 5th edition books one day and disappeared with them. And I still believe I've got a couple of them upstairs in his room. And he's like, I want to run 1st edition. I want to do nothing but 1st edition. And he was probably 14 at the time. And he loved it. We did that for a while. And then 5th edition came out. So we got the books and he's reading. He's like, oh, wait, I like this version too. So we've been pretty much hardcore 5th edition. So he's going to run all those 5th edition versions. But as we were running the Giant series, and I'm adopting the Stone Giants from Dragonfoot and the Cloud Giants from the new 5th edition adventure, I, like I said, kept calling this Storm King's Daughter. So I wrote a brief adventure called The Frost Giant's Daughter. So after the Frost Giants adventure, they're going across the tundra, and they're being chased by dire wolves and these other giant frost giants, and of course they run into the Frost Giant's daughter. But at the same time, I also adopted, remember the old dragon cover? And I don't remember, it was right around in the hundreds, and I think Thorne did the cover. It was the ranger fighting the skeleton of a frost giant.
Yeah,
I'd
vaguely. I quit my subscription to Dragons somewhere in the 90s, I think so.
yeah. But this was one of those I consider like one of the top 10 covers of Dragon, and it was
Uh,
like 107. No, I know it was 107. I profiled it on my blog, so I know it's there somewhere. Anyway, so I had to have Frost Giants for them to fight. Excuse me, Frost Giant skeletons for them to fight.
uh,
For that, I just used my old D&D. I'm actually looking over there at them. I have all the old LGN toy D&D figures, the action figures that they sold. So I have a bunch of skeletons, and of course, for the action figures, they're just normal sized skeletons. But compared to 25 millimeter miniatures, they're frost giants. So
yeah, that works out well. I love times when you can do that.
So I've done that, and that the kids were like. So I'm trying to polish that up. I was supposed to get it out for this month, to be honest with you. I seriously doubt that's going to happen now. The day job has kind of kicked me in the butt this last couple of months. So yeah, we're doing that. And for the second, what I call the second campaign, we're going through some of the other modules, and that I'm more freely adopting first edition ideas.
Such as
combat's a lot deadlier. I try to I do more save or die sorts of saves. Now, I mean, to be fair, 5th edition is every bit as deadly when you play it rules as written as first edition. Right. Anybody who tells you different isn't playing it correctly. Do you heal faster? Well, yes, you do. But this is a game where a 7th level fighter can still be taken out by a goblin. Right. It's not that the fighter's been nerfed at all. It's that the goblins have a pretty good chance of hitting you. And I mean, there is a flatter progression in some things. And the most powerful magic item you can get in a typical 5th edition game ever is a +3 sword. And you can only have 3 magic items on you at one point in time.
Oh, really? I missed that part of the rules.
Yeah, and 5th edition has this concept called attunement. Now, if you have something like a bag of holding, all right, great. You can have as many bag of holdings as you can carry. You need a +1 dagger? Fine, you can have a +1 dagger. You want a sword of life stealing? You can only attune that once. And once you attune it, you only have 2 other slots for attunement for weapons. Okay. These are magic items that have become special to you. You get a little bit more for them, but you're limited to how many you can actually have. And this includes things like a robe of stars or a helm of brilliance or anything else like that. And if I go through the tables in the 5th edition Dungeon Master's Guide looking for a magic item and it's not there, well, I go grab the 1st edition DMG. So yeah. I've used artifacts. I've used Baba Yaga's hut. Wand of Orcus is going to show up sooner or later. Don't tell my kids, because they're terrified of this gigantic Orcus figure I've got over here anyway. And other things like that. So it's not so much of a huge rules change, it's a mentality change. Right now they are going through I've just for this particular campaign, I combined it's the Isle of Dread and Dwellers of the Forbidden City. Mm-hmm. So now the Dwellers of the Forbidden City is actually on the central plateau in the Isle of Dread. And I've set them on a hex crawl. I'm like, hey, you guys landed here. Half your party is now going down the shore in this boat that you've commandeered, and you're now mapping. And the rest of you are doing this hex crawl where you're mapping the interior. So if they don't map it, they don't find their way home very easily. And so it's been kind of fun. They enjoyed the hell out of it. So it's still the same rules that they've been used to. I'm not trying to do, descending armor class for them. It's still the same armor class they've been used to since 3rd edition, but it's got a more 1st edition feel to me. So I guess
now, save or die. On the other hand, there is not that I can recall. There's not a 5th edition equivalent to that.
There is, in the terms of they have what they're called death saves, and if you miss 3 of those after a certain time, so let's say you have a death save and you miss it, and then that doesn't necessarily mean you die, but if you miss 2 more death saves after that for whatever reason, probably even unrelated to the first one, well, guess what? You're dead.
Yeah, but you don't jump to that until you are already. I mean, red is
Yeah.
written. You don't jump to that until you're already at 0 hit points, and then
That's correct.
It's a special sort of save because there are no bonuses or penalties to it. It's just basically a 50-50 shot. So
right, and I mean, so for me to make the 5th edition feel more like first, those come up far more often. So the poisons are deadlier. Instead of recently they had about coming down to Isle of the Dread, a couple of characters had about a seasickness. Well, the 5th edition mechanic for that is disadvantage, where whatever you roll, like if you're going to roll to attack or whatever, you roll the 20-sided die. Well, now you got to roll 2 of those, and you take the worst roll, and that happens. So I've got actually the wizard went from 3 days of seasickness to 5 days of jungle sickness. So she's been on disadvantage roll now for 5 days. And it's just been awful for the wizard. I nearly took out the wizard, the ranger, the cleric, and the thief that we have in the party in this. And all the only thing they were battling were 2 trolls. So these are 4th level characters battling 2 trolls, and I nearly wiped them out.
What is interesting to me about 5th edition in terms of making a comparison, I mean, there are lots and lots of comparisons to make, right. But one of the interesting things about it is that it tends to give actually better mechanics for. I love the death saves too, which some people hate, but it tends to give good mechanics for sort of slow winnowing down of the party's capability to deal with things. Like there's the exhaustion stuff, there's the disadvantage stuff, whereas in any of the older versions, normally what you would be doing is, a little bit of tinkering. You effectively have a lower strength, or you're getting a minus on your saving throws, and you can toggle it a little bit more easily because you've got those -1s that don't really show up very often in 5th edition. You tend to jump to a particular status that's predefined. But I liked the idea that when you're doing some sort of adventure that relies upon progressively weakening the party, precisely what you just described, jungle fever, seasickness, so on and so forth, that the game does a pretty good job of handling that sort of adventure.
Yeah, and for me at least, I mean, let's be perfectly honest. I'm not sure how many of us actually ran 1st edition rules as written back in the day anyway. I mean, I hear people talking all the time how they didn't use segments for spellcasting or weapon speed. I actually did use those because I always played a lot of wizards and a lot of witches that I was working on. So for me, it was like, well, if I can track how many segments a spellcasting does, can I squeeze in an extra spell, per round? Which, if you look in games I've written after this, you'll see that I've done exactly that. I've put multiple casting for spellcasters in games. So for me, it's more tweaking along the lines of how do I adopt the same feel as opposed to, say, the same rules. Now, I will admit I tried doing this a lot with 4th edition. And we did do a 4th edition game for a while, and 4th edition is a very well put together game. It's got a lot of nice features about it. It's just not an old school game.
I would even say that it diverges so much from a lot of the key functions of what you would think of as D&D, that I would say it's not really D&D. It's a different game.
It is. I mean, and my purpose here is not to rip on 4th edition. To be honest.
Mine can be. I'll handle that part.
Well, actually, see the other thing I'm doing is I've started a 3rd campaign where I'm taking all of the 4th edition material that I still have. Some of it's still right over there, and I'm running it under 5th edition. And
so it's basically
it's really fun.
You're kind of taking structures and adventure backstories and
Right.
the different pathways that people might take through the adventures, and you are grafting on again
Right.
mechanics that you think will handle those better.
Well, yeah. So, for example, one thing Fourth Edition did extremely well is it made monsters were not built with the same rules as characters were, like Third Edition was, and Fifth Edition has also gotten away with that, but Fourth Edition really diverted from it. So I actually used the Frost Giant stats from Fourth Edition for when my group was battling named Frost Giants. So when they were battling the Frost Giant, the Jarl, or the Frost Giant's daughter, I actually used different things from Fourth Edition to sort of give them something extra. Like, for example, the Frost Giant's daughter had the ability to cast walls of ice and could breathe out a cone of cold, which is a nice surprise to anybody who's done nothing but sort of old school Frost Giants, where they have an axe and maybe they can throw some boulders at you, and if they start throwing spells at you, that suddenly makes them feel a little bit deadlier. Maybe they're not really.
That's a game changer.
Maybe in truth they're not deadlier when you do the math, but it does cause the party to step back a second and go, oh, wait a second, what's going on here? So, and for me, that was worth it. So that's why I haven't unloaded my Fourth Edition books at the local game auction at all. So, and the art's still pretty. So maybe one day, maybe one day I'll play it again. Never say never. Hey, I still got my where's my first edition? Oh, there's my first edition stuff up there, my original edition.
Yeah.
So it's still there. I pull that out every so often too.
Oh yeah, absolutely. It's okay. Well,
cool.
Anything else that you want to sort of capstone that discussion about Fifth Edition? You've got that one method, that we talked about. Have you got any other things that you think are necessary? Do you do any tweaks to the rules themselves with it?
You know what? Not so much, because I really wanted to give Fifth Edition its due as it was written. I felt like the developers, and of course WotC, did a very good job of at least trying to get everybody involved in the open play test. I know that there was some stumbles there at the beginning, but they're a big company, and big companies move slowly. That's just the way things are. I mean, it's not like, me, if I'm going to roll out something on my own, like I come up with a new Swords and Wizardry class or something like that, I can put out pieces on my blog and I can get some immediate feedback. People can try it out, and I can change directions very quickly. Larger companies don't do that because they just can't really. So I felt that they did a pretty good job there in the beginning, and I wanted to give the rules a chance to show me what they could and couldn't do on their own. Because in truth, that's exactly what I did with First Edition. That's exactly what I did with Moldvay Basic when I got started. And as I started finding out those areas that worked great for me or didn't work so great for me, I would make the changes. I'm pretty happy with where this game is. Maybe it's because I'm older and I don't want to tinker with the stuff as much, or maybe it's because I do a lot of subconscious tinkering on my own as I'm running. I'm pretty happy with where I'm at with this game. Right. I mean, if I want to tinker, I've got tons and tons of games. I can pull out, First Edition and do some stuff with that too.
Like you've said, I mean, you're using that. All right, so Tim, let's do this.
Sure.
Since we've got kind of brackets around a good topic, let's go ahead. We'll draw the Fifth Edition one to the close, and then we'll get off the air, and we will talk about doing one of these about game design with another bracketed topic. So
sure, that sounds good.
All right, say goodbye to everybody, and we're going to go ahead.
All right, we'll see y'all soon.
We will still be on here when I hit the stop broadcast button. Well, that's the wrap up on this conversation with Tim Brannon. So I'd just like to give the sign off line of no matter what kind of Dungeons and Dragons that it is you play, Imagine the hell out of it.